Welcome, Mr. Joe Espana from England in our today's session on managing employees and employee engagement in the times of crisis and also how the workplace will look like in future. We are very thankful to you for joining us today. Let me briefly introduce Mr. Joe Espana. He is basically Assistant Organizational Development Professional with more than 25 years experience. In fact, I think more than 30 years experience now. And he has worked with global blue chip companies. Is his background and his research areas include senior leadership roles in corporate business life, and he has been engaged in different kind of assignment, including behavior change, performance improvement, and also he has been executive coach to several leaders of FTSE 300 companies. He is a very high in demand leadership coach, and he has extensive experience of working across sectors and internationally, including pharmaceutical, healthcare, leisure, travel, hospitality, financial services, insurance, technology, telecommunications, manufacturing, beverages, petrochemicals, broadcasting, professional services, and online publishing. So I welcome him in our today's session. And other than his work, his qualification in his PhD, MPhil, and MSc honors, and MCIPT, and diploma holder in coaching as well. He is the member of Association of Coaching UK and the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. So let's welcome him on the board. So over to you, Spana, uh, in this session. So
So,
please, if I miss something in your introduction, so please go on.
well, salam alaikum. It's great to be with you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I think you've covered more than enough. So let's start our conversation.
Okay, Joe. The current situation is very different, very bad, and most of the people who are not working, and even those who are working and on job, they're not feeling engaged. So, how can we ensure employee engagement in the times of crisis, especially in the current situation? What do you advise? What do you say about it?
In my opinion, a really important question. I think, anyway, has been an increasingly important factor in organization success. We know this. But I think what's happened with the COVID crisis is that it's brought it into much more leaders across all different organizations. When the COVID pandemic first struck, here they are trying to make 100% of the decisions and quickly. And before we thought that we lived in a volatile, complex, and uncertain business world, I think the pandemic has brought that into relief a lot more. So I think my impression is that and what the researchers seem to show us is that there are some fundamental needs that employees, whether they're stuck at home waiting to find out what's happening next, or whether they're working from home and still waiting to find out what is happening next, that I think that there's several things. So they probably need a lot of clarity and focus as to what's happening. Interestingly enough, I think this is true of all organizations. Everybody's looking upstairs. So employees are looking for direction and leadership from their line manager and from senior leadership. Business leaders are looking for direction and focus and clarity from their governmental institutions as well, and their governmental leaders. So this idea of clarity, focus, what should we be focusing on, what should we be doing, is a really important one. I think alongside this is the notion of trust. Can I trust as an employee my leaders to be making the right decisions for me and for the organization? Will I have a job to return to, and what will it all look like in the future? So this notion of trust and the trust relationship is going to be a really important thing, I think. The other thing, I think, particularly if people are still employed, whether they're able still to go to their place of employment or whether they're now having to work from home, people need to be encouraged. They need to feel valued, and a sense of what they do matters. So leaders obviously have to really pay attention to this, keep people engaged in the notion of still being part of something. So the idea of identity, I am part of an organization, I'm part of the, but I think if you're interested in particularly fostering, developing employment, particularly in this time, I think if leaders are going to demonstrating empathy, stay in touch with people, enable them to feel involved and actions. So people need to hear that and feel that their line managers, they're seeing it might be what is happening for their worries about the situation. Really big need, I believe, right now for leadership empathy.
Okay, so I think you explained in a very excellent way, especially how to ensure the engagement of employees in this situation. Uh, why this employee engagement is so important part of the overall employee experience, especially in the current situation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's take a big picture first. If we were having this conversation at the end of customers, and this is really important to us, and then later on, as business developed through the 20th century, we're thinking, well, actually, this is really about motivating these to, give more of themselves and contribute more, so they feel motivated to do this. But actually, this whole subject has moved on, and the neuroscience very employees, and depending on your definition of engagement, actually it doesn't matter how you define engagement. What the organization and what people get out of it is, we know it affects things like staff turnover, absenteeism, maybe product and service quality. It impacts ultimately on things like organizational growth, business growth, and profitability. I think, however, that what's at the core of it all is the relationship between the employer and the employee. And that has definitely developed over many years, and people's approaches and attitudes to what that means has developed. And I think we've moved away from what we might call external motivations, sort of the circumstance. Have I got the tools to do the job? Is the office or the plant or the place of the factory, the place of work, conducive for me to be able to do the work? Am I getting a good enough salary? These are all external factors. And we're focusing much, much more into internal motivators, which are around how I feel about being here and working with these people. And do I like it? Do I enjoy it? That's what we're aiming in working period, whether it's on a shift or a working week. When people come to the end of that period, are they thinking, thank goodness it's finished, I'm really looking forward to my days off, wow, I'm so happy? Or are they thinking on the night before going back to work after their break, maybe the night before they start their new shift or their new working week, are they thinking with my colleagues and a work that I find fulfilling and purposeful and I feel I'm contributing? So that difference of attitude is really important to businesses. And I think the other factor that is at play now in the early part of the 21st century is we've got 4 different generations all working at the same time together in businesses. And obviously there are differences in their aspirations generationally, in their needs and their expectations of work, work and life, work-life balance, if you like. And so the approach that different generations take to work and what it means to go to work is a challenge for organizations. I do think, though, that assuming that, when we've got a lot of data that says much better to have engaged employees. I'll give you a specific statistic, which I think is really interesting in a minute. But assuming that we think it's a good idea, we still have to decide, well, how do you boost it? How do you sustain it? How do you keep it going? Given that we've got these 4 different generations. An interesting that's well known here in the UK, it's estimated on productivity. And this is in a developed economy, right? So the UK is the 5th largest economy of the world, and we're losing huge amounts of productivity because of disengagement. In fact, if you look at OECD figures, we've got one of the lowest levels of productivity by whatever measure you want to use in Europe. So this idea of employee engagement is central to the whole notion of effective and efficient business management and business results. And I think we can't lose sight of that. In terms of these 4 generations, say that some of the common themes is one I've already mentioned, is this cycle with my colleagues and with my line manager. I think there is the factor rather than organizational, is the idea of climate, having a positive, and they're growing. And I think if we boil everything down, there may be all sorts of factors, but those 3 factors are probably common to all those 4 generations. And we can see the business results of paying attention to and actually doing something at an organizational level about.
Okay, Mr. Joe, generally, can you hear me?
Yes, I can,
Okay.
yeah.
So generally, it is perceived that the employee engagement is the responsibility of HR people. But my perception is different about it. I think employee engagement is not the duty or the responsibility of only HR people. It is the responsibility of the overall leadership, the line managers and departmental heads as well. So, so please, you have to guide me if I'm thinking in the right direction. Number one. Number two is, let's say in some organizations they make HR responsible for employee engagement, and in that situation, how HR people will feel motivated or engaged, because they are under pressure, they are under psychological pressures, and they're not motivated, and they are equally demotivated like the other employees of the organization. So this is also the question which somebody asked me in the chat area as well. So what do you say about it?
I think you raise a very, very important point, which I wanted to talk about anyway, which is a lot of organizations see employee engagement as something that the organization does to employees. So it's top down. The second mistake they make is the one that you've referred to, which is employee engagement isn't the responsibility of everyone, it's the responsibility of HR. Well, that can't be true. That can't be true, because it's placing too many eggs in one. More mature, more understanding leadership team will realize that this is not just. Ghulam, you got stuck there for a minute. I think it was the delay in the signal. But anyway, I hope it's one factor which is to do with, if you like, persuading or influencing senior leaders to understand their role in employee engagement generally. And the way that I would recommend that HR communities address this is that they focus on the business case, the value that could be derived from focusing on employee engagement initiatives. So that's kind of like, it's no point in talking to senior leaders like the chief financial officer about the general concept of engagement, even if they did understand it. At the end of the day, they're interested in what's the payback, particularly if we're going to invest actual money into engagement initiatives. So for HR communities, the language should be about the business rather than engagement, but the vehicle is engagement. So that's one issue. The other thing which I think falls out of that as a corollary is that as soon as um, the business as a whole, or even parts of the business, start seeing the positive effects on productivity, on the feelings in the place, the climate, and everything else that they're trying to achieve, what it does is make HR's credibility with the business to go up, and that is a previous HR director myself. So, you know, I think in itself, but we also have to focus on explaining the right thing to our senior leaders, but from a very business focused perspective. I think that's my second issue then, is to do more about what organizations can do. It's been my experience that, or because organizations and even the more advanced leaders think of it as employee engagement is something that we as an organization must do for employees. All the initiatives, all the activities tend to revolve around that. And I think a big challenge, even when companies are, they do their annual surveys and they've got really good scores in employee engagement, the challenge still remains: how do you translate employee engagement responsibility from organizations right down to the individual? In other words, how do we get individuals to take ownership for their own level of engagement? And then what could they do to contribute to this? So if I steal a line from President Kennedy, you remember the very famous line at the beginning of the John Kennedy's presidency in the right? So if I steal that idea for a minute, the question for in engagement terms, which is still the biggest, prove your own level of engagement. How can we help you to help yourself in developing further engagement? And this is a subject, I think, that has still got a long story to go. Translating the whole idea of employee engagement from being just an organizational level thing to right down to individual responsibility, and we've still got a long way to go there. That would be some of my thinking and what I've experienced around helping organizations to view the idea of employee engagement in a different way. But you've got to make the business case, otherwise it won't be sold. It won't be, they'll think of it as another HR initiative, good idea, but we may or may not do it, or we may or may not put some effort into it.
Yes, you're right. Actually, what I believe, as an HR person, the one responsibility of HR person is also to transfer or to bring the people management skills or HR uh, line manager as an HR manager skills in the line managers as well. It's really very important. So once you provide this education or this training to your people managers or the line managers, then they understand the importance of employee engagement, and then they can bring this thing down to the level of employees as well. Otherwise, these engagement activities just will remain only in the employee engagement service. What do you say?
Really key question that HR professionals and learning and development professionals could be asking, employee engagement. And the research around this is super clear. It's super clear. At the end of the day, employee engagement, if you like, for employee engagement is me, my team, to be able to create the circumstances through good leadership practices, good management practices. If they are not equipped to do this, you're not good. The annual survey is not going to make any difference at all. And remember, one of the statistics I wanted to raise is that globally, despite all the efforts around employee engagement that we've had over many years, lots of different strategies, lots different approaches. The global statistics says approximately only 15% of employees, worrying statistic, because, and it stayed more or less between 15 and 17% for several years. Gallup is the biggest researcher in this field, and their meta studies are really interesting. Buying managers in order to help the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century.